Welcome to the Kentucky History Channel, where we strive to bring you all the Kentucky history content you want and you deserve. Kentucky is a part of all of us, and we plan on covering all the history we can, from Pike County to Fulton County, from Louisville to Harlan. Here on our YouTube channel, you can find many videos dedicated to different events, people, governors, and places in Kentucky. There's something for everybody. While you're here, if you like the channel, hit the subscribe button and the notification button so you get notified anytime new Kentucky history is available. And if you want to support the channel, we have a Patreon page as well, or patreon.com/kyhistorypod. Welcome back to the Kentucky History Podcast. I'm your host, Jameson Cable, and I have another great episode of Kentucky history for us. And I have another great guest, Miss Deirdre Scaggs, who is the Associate Dean of the University of Kentucky Library's Special Collections Research Center and Director of the Wendell H. Ford Public Policy Research Center. She has authored multiple works shedding light on cultural and culinary history. Her latest endeavor is Simplicity and Excellence, Elizabeth Kremer, From Beaten Biscuits to Shaker Lemon Pie, which explores the journey of Elizabeth Kremer through the lens of traditional culinary delights. Deirdre, how you doing?
I'm so good. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. Before we get too much into it, could you tell us just a brief bit about yourself and your Kentucky connection and that sort of thing?
Sure. So I am a Kentuckian. I left Kentucky when I went to college. I kind of made a big loop and I came back to Lexington, which is about 2 hours from where I'm originally from, which is in northeastern Kentucky, which is in the Appalachian region. And for me, being able to work at the University of Kentucky and have a creative and research outlet to pair something that was so important to my childhood and upbringing. Our family meals were something that were very important growing up. And so to be able to write about Kentucky's culinary history is really personal and significant for me.
Well, when I'm looking through your titles here, I mean, it sounds like a great job for somebody who enjoys history. uh, that's good. And I of course have the Kentucky connection. What part in Eastern Kentucky or
It's in
northeastern?
northeastern Kentucky, so I grew up in between Maysville and Ashland, roughly, right
Okay,
along the Ohio River in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains.
so about Greenup-ish or
Yeah,
Carter
definitely. We
County-ish. Okay.
bordered Greenup County. Yeah.
Yeah, gotcha. Well, those are both. I'm a little bit biased for Maysville. A good town with a lot of history and stuff. Went up there a few times, so go to
Yeah.
Maysville, right?
It's so pretty there. They've restored their theater. I think it's a really
Mhm.
great town.
Yeah, yeah. Well, um, let's get into this recent book that will be coming out on Tuesday, May the 7th. So be looking out for that as well. And you can pre-order it already on. Tell us where people can pre-order it. I guess let's get started there.
You could order it from the University of Kentucky Press, which is always
Hmm.
preferable. But of course, any other options locally, you could get it at or order it through Joseph Beth or go through Amazon.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we appreciate the University of Kentucky Press sending us the book, copy a little early and all that. But let's get into this book.
All right.
And the typical. I know it's probably a generic question, but what made you want to write this book?
Well, it really wasn't so much me
Mhm,
originally. I have to say that back in it was 2016, and I'm in charge of the Special Collections Research Center at the University of Kentucky, and we have a lot of really amazing local Kentucky family papers. And I'd worked with members of the Jewell family, the McVeigh family, and so I was visiting this day Frances Jewell Hammond at her home in Pleasant View Farm in Jessamine County. And I'll leave that there as a teaser for further research. But when I was there at her house talking about additional family papers that she wanted to donate, one of her relatives was there, Evelina Settle. And Evelina had some materials that she also wanted to donate. Her part of the family had donated materials as well. And, so we talked about that donation that day too. And she handed me this um, manuscript that was, I would say, more of a memoir of what she and her sister Pam had written about, their childhood with their mother, Elizabeth Cromwell Creamer. And, at the time she said, I know you've done another Kentucky cookbook, and Elizabeth was so important in Kentucky's food history. Do you think you would ever be able to do something with this? And so that day, I made a commitment to her that I would do my best to try and do something with this manuscript that she and her
Mhm.
sister had written. And it took 5 more years before I was in a place that I could even think about it. And I met with at the time, newish director of the University Press of Kentucky, Ashley Runyon, to talk about, this manuscript. And she was super interested in it. And so at that point, well, when I signed the official contract, I contacted Evelina and her husband, John Settle, to let them know that I'd finally followed through on that promise that I made to Evelina that day in 2016. And the day that I called them, it was October 18th, 2021, to let them know that, this dream of being able to preserve the important legacy that Evelina's mother had made in Kentucky's history. It was Elizabeth's birthday,
Oh,
the
wow.
day that I called, and so Elizabeth would have been 120 years
Wow.
old on the day that I called to let them know that we were gonna be able to share her story with everyone.
Mhm, mhm. Well, that's a pretty, touching, uh, point there to get it out, on that date and so forth, and
Yeah.
it sounds like a really good journey to, have this come to life. So, who was Elizabeth Kramer? I mean, because a
Oh,
lot of people may not. This is the first I've heard of her.
right.
And to this is a bit more modern. Typically sometimes we talk about Daniel Boone and stuff. This is a bit more
Mhm.
modern, but still something part of Kentucky history that definitely needs to be shared. But so who was Miss Kramer?
I mean, you're right, it is more modern, but at the same time, Elizabeth Cromwell was born in 1901 in
Hmm.
Cynthiana,
Yeah.
Kentucky, so she was born at the very end of the Victorian era. And so, much like many of us who experience all the generational changes, she went through so many generational technological advancements and is with women's voting and women's rights. She really experienced a lot. But, she was just a girl from Cynthiana, Kentucky, who went to the University of Kentucky. Like many women of her age, she pursued home economics. She didn't pursue teaching, which would have been the other
Yeah.
course of instruction for women during that time. But she was also, even though she came from a family, her father had been mayor of Cynthiana, but she still had to work to put herself through school. And so she went to Cuba in the late 19, like 1918, 19. She taught English there and earned money so that she could continue to pay her tuition at the University of Kentucky. She graduated. She got fired from her first job at the
Oh,
Phoenix Hotel in Lexington. But, she ended up going on to manage restaurants in New York City. She went through Prohibition. She managed restaurants in Louisville and Cincinnati and went through the 1937 flood. She worked through the birth and early childhood of her first daughter, which was
Wow.
something
Yeah.
not a lot of women even held full-time jobs outside of the home, let alone to continue that job after she had a baby. But it was when she had her second child that she did, step away from work, managing these really successful restaurants and, making amazing food. But she focused on her family and, went through World War II and rationing and victory gardening. Um, and coming out of retirement in her late 60s, she opened the restaurant at Shaker Village in Shakertown, Kentucky. And, I really think that in terms of turning that place, that amazing place, into a tourist destination, she had a huge role to play in that.
Yeah, and that's kind of where we get really connected to some history we've talked about before. We've had a few guests, and we've been talking a lot about Mercer County and the history going on there. Just a
Yeah.
reminder: 250th celebration is happening in Harrodsburg this coming up June. Things are going on, so um, be mindful and get out there and check out some history in Mercer County. You are actually the second person we've had on the podcast talking about Pleasant Hill, that down in Mercer County. We had Carol Peachy on uh, a few months ago, talking about her book. So going full circle here. How like when I'm thinking of that, I mean her life really spanned over the 20th century of Kentucky. I mean, she
Yeah,
experienced all of it. Well, not even Kentucky. I mean, go to New York and Cincinnati, these other
yeah,
places. She had a big influence.
she
Um,
did.
yeah. And really, when you dive into what do you think her biggest motivation for, well, you know,
Mm.
I want to say just into the culinary arts. Like, what drew her to those things, to that? I mean, is that an answerable question?
I mean, I'll give you my answer, which of course is just based in my feelings and research and speculation. So I'll put it out there with that caveat. But in the memoir that the daughters produced, they talked a lot about how important it was to their mother to have this really proper, almost ritualistic aspect to dining. It was an affair. It was
Yeah.
a time for them to connect as a family. In Elizabeth's childhood, they had formal, elaborate noontime meals. Like growing up, we referred to the noontime meal as dinner, and she did too during this time of her life. And so that was the big meal, and that was when the family talked and they got together. And um, family members recounted that Elizabeth loved to spend time in the kitchen. And of course, they had an African American servant who lived in the home from the time that all the children were born and grew into adults until after Evelina, the matriarch, passed away. And there are anecdotes of Elizabeth, really appreciating the woman who worked in the kitchen. They only refer to her as "cuz," but she taught her how to cook. And so I think that this was just such an integral and important part of her childhood and adulthood and professional life that the book is called Simplicity and Excellence for this reason, because no matter what it was, if it was a birthday or if it was a noontime meal or serving the busiest lunch crowd ever, it was going to be done simply and it was going to be done with excellence.
Yeah, well, those are definitely fitting titles. When you really get into some of these recipes and stuff, and we'll get to that. And we can't. You did give a pretty good brief history of her life. What would be her biggest connection? Would it be the shaker moment?
I
you
think
think?
that's where she got the most recognition for
Mhm.
sure. When you get to the second half of the book or the last maybe quarter of the book into that Shakertown era, she and Shakertown were being recognized in the culinary scene, not just in Kentucky, but in Gourmet Magazine and through the Southern Foodways Alliance started by John Edgerton. And people were paying attention and really celebrating the food that and the experience that she had created at Shaker Village. And I think that was really part of some of that early um the movement towards more appreciation of our culinary history and food as an art form and things like that.
Now, whenever when did she start at Shaker
It
Village?
was I don't have my notes in front of me, so we'll say around 65, 67.
Okay, okay. Well, and just so to clarify those people, pretty much the Shakers, the the original founders of that were pretty much gone by this by that
Yes.
time. um, so, th- what? Well, let's get into some of the food aspects of it because
Okay.
that's what I'm most interested in. The history is good too. Um, and what would your favorite dish? Because this book has loads of recipes in it as well. I mean, how many total?
Oh,
Do you know
goodness.
right off the
I
top?
need to count that. That's a really shoot. We're gonna call that second interview. I'll be ready for the answer to that
Okay,
question.
yeah, there you go.
But I
So,
think it's a good mix. Every chapter has recipes and they really span Elizabeth's early life, in Cynthiana and some of those traditional recipes such as beaten biscuits and orange marmalade and country sausage and things like that, to dishes that she made in New York and of course shaker lemon pie.
of course,
Of course.
that's a must-have, right?
It is.
And now, and this is just me thinking. Whenever people go to Shaker Village now, and we go to Pleasant Hill, would a lot of her dining still be there? Some of her recipes and all that.
It's been a little bit since I've been there. The last time I was there, they had, done a really great job of modernizing the menu, but still maintaining, these traditional elements that keep people coming back and the things that they're known for. So it has changed, but change is good. So
Yeah, yeah. So with sticking to dining and culinary stuff, what's your favorite Kentucky dish?
oh shoot. Um I'm a real pie girl, and so you could pretty much pick a pie, and at that moment, it's gonna be my favorite Kentucky dish. I grew up close enough to Maysville that transparent pies
Mhm.
were, a standard for holidays for us. In my first cookbook, my favorite pie in there is the orange pie. And my favorite pie in this one is the chess pie. I just love those sugary, simple pies.
They're great, I know it.
Yeah.
Well, like, yeah, my grandma who still cooks for us pretty much about every Sunday that we're able to make it to her house, she'll always make a butterscotch pie or
Ugh,
a chocolate pie,
mhm.
and yeah, it's more of a cherry kinda cheesecake, but, she'll take requests from whatever my kids ask
Yeah.
for, and that'll be it, yeah. What well, what's some other just and I find this interesting whenever, I went to college and you meet new people and then you get to discussing things like those things that like almost every Kentuckian kind of knows about food wise. I always salmon patties.
Oh,
I
yeah.
mean, salmon patties, like everybody, like I'm kind of blown away because when I was younger, I was like, nobody eats these things, but then everybody does.
I can tell you that when I left Kentucky, nobody did, but I did growing up, and I still make them now. I mean, they're a great pantry staple that you can
Oh,
just throw
yeah.
together whenever you want.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we had them regularly.
Yeah. Um, let's see what else. And and this probably is probably taboo for me to say, but like, what's it? Uh, oh, not derby pie. Hot brown. Like,
Oh,
that's a big thing, but like, I've never really got into those. I mean, they're okay. It's not my. This is just not my Kentucky dining choice, I guess.
no, it wasn't my thing, and, again, I grew up in the Appalachian region, and
Hmm.
so we always my dad would go out and gather forage morels, and so we
Hmm.
had fried morels every spring, and, they were so amazing. I didn't appreciate them nearly as much until after I left, but one of the other things, my grandmother would give me the option of, requesting what kind of birthday cake I wanted, and I always wanted an apple stack cake.
Oh yeah,
And
that's another one.
yeah, right, but they're super labor intensive, and every
Hmm.
year she would kind of sigh, but of course she would make it for me, and, knowing now what a labor of love it is, I appreciate that also much more.
Yeah, yeah. My great grandma would make those, and it's been a long time since I've had one, but
I
I
know,
can
me
see.
too.
I grill stuff on the steak. I can cook. You know, I have cooking skills. I can follow directions, but looking at that does look like it takes a lot of work.
It
I mean,
does, yeah.
yeah, and then, let me ask you this question too. My in-laws are from Hazard, so we go to there for many different occasions and so forth. And like whenever it comes to Thanksgiving and Christmas and stuff, cornbread is always one of the things that is always made, and their cornbread is so good, and it's so much better than any cornbread. And I mean, my grandmas make it and all, but it is so much better. I don't know if it's just Eastern Kentucky thing or what, but it's good.
Well, speaking from my experience, it was the bacon grease.
Ah, gotcha. It makes it so much
Yeah,
more moist, right? Is
it
that what
really
it is?
does. It really, really does.
Yeah. It's good stuff. Um, anyway, back to the book. Back to the book.
Yes.
Um, where again, what would you say is Miss Kramer's biggest influences as far as her recipes and stuff? What do you think? I mean, I know there's probably many and so forth, but like, just give us a guide or thought on it.
Um, Shoot. I mean, I think that is a really hard question, and devotees of that original menu, might come after me after I make my proclamations, but I'm going to go ahead. I don't think you can leave out the shaker lemon pie, obviously. I mean, that was one of those original shaker recipes that Elizabeth researched and tested and, put on their menu. I think the tomato soup would be another one. I know that just looking at the research, the articles, um, written about the menu there, family anecdotes about this. I think the tomato soup is definitely another one of those items. Um, Shoot, she had a bisque on, or not a bisque, an aspic. So sorry. On the menu, that was something that was a favorite of one of the board members of Shaker Village. The corn muffins, but also I think it was. Gosh, I'm just going to keep going. I'm so sorry.
You're fine.
One of the things that again was so important to her, which I talked a little bit about before, was that everyone felt like they were being catered to when they
Yeah.
came into her restaurant. She wanted everyone to have their own, servings of cream for their coffee. And, she didn't want sugar packets and things like that. She just thought that didn't fit within her view of what an excellent yet simple dining experience was. And so her relish trays were, these things that she would set out at the table to make guests feel comfortable and welcome, but have something to snack on. And, she started a garden that was for the kitchen there. And so I think it was all of those things. It was the attention to detail. It was her research into the kinds of foods that the Shakers would have had, and her implementation of those recipes in such a, amazing culinary but welcoming place that tourists felt at home in, that locals felt at home in, travelers, felt welcome there. She was known to, if a guest would say, "We're coming in for Christmas," she would put their favorite dish on the menu for that night.
Yeah.
Like, regularly, that was something that she did.
Wow.
So she just had that amazing care and attention.
Well, that extra effort, I guess, when you think about, a dining experience, obviously the food tasting good is
Yeah.
is a big priority. She obviously had that down pretty well too, but making it more of an experience to go along
Mhm.
with it, really, makes people feel more at home. We talked, or I've talked about my grandma and her, you know, cooking and so forth, and that really relates to people. And if you have somebody who's
Mhm.
doing that for you at a restaurant and so forth, you're going to feel more apt to come back. You're going to enjoy it and all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
It really shows, I guess, her endurement or passion for the art of it. And wanting it to be excellent, that too, shows that it was a big priority, um with that, or with her, ability as well. She was obviously talented if she was working from New York and Cincinnati and all these other places as
Mhm.
well. um let's talk for a second too about some of your other books. um tell us, you got two, three other books, I believe. Two?
3 or 4?
4? Okay. You're, you're losing count of them, I guess, right?
Oh, no, that sounds terrible.
Sticking with, uh, culinary, the historic Kentucky kitchen,
Yeah.
traditional recipes for today's cook.
Yeah, that book, really started. Andrew McGraw was my co-author. He was a graduate assistant in the library school program at the time. He was processing a collection that had all these recipes in it. And he had worked in kitchens before, and we just used to always talk about food. And we were talking about the profession and, the different ways that archives play roles in people's lives that we may or may not even realize, or maybe we take for granted. And, we were talking about the interesting thing about finding these recipes was that was something that you could bring to life.
Mhm.
We could cook it
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
kind of have not the same experience, but have an experience that was rooted in this different historical context. And so, I just started researching, trying to find all the handwritten recipes that I could find in our
Yeah.
collection at UK. And, it didn't take too terribly long to find enough that I got real excited about the idea of cooking these recipes and doing something else with them. And, we reached out again to the University Press of Kentucky and talked about it, and, submitted a really sort of detailed draft. They approved it. And, then it was 2 years of research and cooking every recipe, modernizing every recipe, failing at so many recipes, really trying to learn a lot about historic cooking and, different ingredients and all of that,
Mhm.
great
Mhm.
stuff. And then another year of editing before that book came out. And that has around 150 over 100 recipes spanning 1850 through 1950,
Wow.
focusing on recipes that were in Kentucky family papers.
Wow.
Yeah, it was so much
That's a
fun.
yeah. Now, back to, the new book, how many of the recipes did you do or have you done?
So those I didn't test because
Uh-huh.
Elizabeth was a real cook. you know.
Yeah.
So in the other project, I was taking kind of just lists and
Uh-huh.
needing to give them instruction. So fortunately, Elizabeth is a bona fide chef, so I didn't have to
Test
question
'em.
her insight and expertise there. And again, I'm such a pie girl. It's the pies that I come
Mhm.
back to
Yeah.
every time.
Well, whenever I always whenever I'm looking at some recipes, and which, I mean, probably is not that often, um, but think back to my grandma, my wife's
Yeah,
grandma, who cooked or cook, and, you ask them how they make it, and they say, "Well, just throw a little salt in here, throw a little
yeah,
sugar in here," you're like,
yep.
"That doesn't tell me anything."
I know.
Uh,
My grandmother could bake that way, and that's
yeah.
just crazy. There
Wow.
is one recipe that I would like to mention. There's a corn soup recipe that was served in the tea room that Elizabeth worked in when she was in college some. And what I love about this corn soup recipe is that it's a it's a trend that I've seen come full circle, because this would have been in the 1920s, early 1920s, but it's a corn soup recipe and to finish it, you put popcorn on the top.
Oh, yeah.
And, that's something that became popular again in the very recent past. And so I think
Mhm.
it's really cool to see something that seems so innovative even now that she was making, in the 1920s.
Yeah, well, 100 years ago, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it is, I mean, I said at the beginning that more modern history, but that's still history, that's 100 years ago. Yeah.
It is.
Yeah. Um, well, the your other books, they're also available through the press, University of Kentucky Press, or other places. Just tell us about those.
Sure. So with my former dean of libraries, we put out a book about the history of women at the University of Kentucky through
Oh, cool.
World War II. That's available through the University Press of Kentucky. My first book was just a pictorial history of women in Lexington with Arcadia Press. And then I did the photography for a book published by Catherine Black that's through a press in Ohio. And so I have, sorry, my dog just
There we
got
go.
really excited. 60 of my photographs. I have a background in photography. And
Okay.
so I have my photographs published in that book.
Okay. Awesome. Well, thanks a bunch for coming back on or for coming on the show.
Yeah, thank you.
This book, it's a good book that, especially if you're wanting to try out some Kentucky recipes or just for some really good culinary recipes, I will say that, you know, uh, Miss Kramer is definitely a historic Kentucky chef, right? So,
Sure.
um, I would highly recommend you get it and just try them out. It's okay if you fail 100 times on the recipes. You never know; you might hit one out of the park, and people may think you came up with it.
Could I say one more thing
Oh
before
yeah,
we
oh yeah, as much as you want.
I would like to just, say thank you and provide a shout out to both Weta Michael and Sarah Bradley, who wrote the intros and the afterword for the book. They are amazing women chefs, and I'm so thankful that they helped me publish this book with an all woman
Mhm.
lineup.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's great. And again, if you want to, taste some of Kentucky history, right? That sounds like
For sure.
that sounds great. Taste some Kentucky history because Kentucky is known for some very interesting cuisines. Not so I don't think they're crazy or anything like that, but
Yeah,
there's nothing wrong with a good fried salmon patty.
that's right.
uh, yeah, well, thank you again for coming on the show. Anything else before we go?
No, I just want to say thank you. It's been a pleasure talking with you. And anytime we can talk again, just let me know.
Yeah, well, it sounds like you got some books we might need to get a little deeper into. Again, the book is Simplicity and Excellence. Elizabeth Kremer, from Beaten Biscuits to Shaker Lemon Pie. Deidre, thank you for coming on the show, and
Thank you.
thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next time.
All right. Bye bye.
Welcome to the Kentucky History Channel, where we strive to bring you all the Kentucky history content you want and you deserve. Kentucky is a part of all of us, and we plan on covering all the history we can, from Pike County to Fulton County, from Louisville to Harlan. Here on our YouTube channel, you can find many videos dedicated to different events, people, governors, and places in Kentucky. There's something for everybody. While you're here, if you like the channel, hit the subscribe button and the notification button so you get notified anytime new Kentucky history is available. And if you want to support the channel, we have a Patreon page as well, or patreon.com/kyhistorypod. You've probably heard about Daniel Boone, but what about the rest of the frontiersmen who came to Kentucky and settled? That's what we want to bring to the Kentucky History Channel. The stories of the untold, the stories of those forgotten. One thing to expect on our channel is great Kentucky content. Some stories that you've never heard of. The Night Riders, who began in western Kentucky. Bloody Monday, the riots in Louisville. The assassination of Governor Goebel, the only governor ever assassinated in the United States. Stories from all over Kentucky, stories that are unforgettable once you've heard them. You can find out who counties in Kentucky are named after and how your county got started. From beginning to end, we plan to document every county in Kentucky, all 120. Reach out to us on all of our social media platforms. Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and also leave a comment on one of our YouTube videos. You can also check out our podcast episodes. You can subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and many more. We're always seeking to find more Kentucky history so we can bring it to you. The viewers, the listeners, we want all the stories and all the events from Kentucky's great history to be told and shared everywhere.